well, starting today and every morning on CP24 Breakfast, CTV News' political commentator Scott Reid will be joining us with some analysis of the federal leaders on the campaign trail leading up to Election Day on April 28th.
All right,
Good
so
morning,
Scott joins us now, but we also have a special guest this morning, CTV's chief political correspondent and host of CTV's Power Play, Vassy Kapelos, joining us. So we've got the political angle covered. We've got the political journalism angle covered. Vassy, let's start with you. We kind of knew that this was going to be happening. It was very unlikely that MPs were going to go back to Ottawa as the prorogation came to an end. What are you going to be looking for on this first full day, Vassy, of campaigning?
Well, I think I'm going to be looking for a couple of things. Good to be with you guys, and hi, Scott. In particular, where the campaigns start, the degree to which they're focused on regions in the first 24 hours and even throughout the first week in the reasons for it. So, for example, the Liberals are out in Atlantic Canada, where public opinion polling shows their fortunes have dramatically changed over the last 2 months. We've got the NDP in Quebec and Toronto. So Toronto seemingly somewhat competitive for them, though they have also been hit pretty hard at the expense, sort of at the NDP's expense to the Liberals' benefit in public opinion polling. And then the Conservatives will be in the GTA, and the GTA, which you guys cover very much so in depth, is an area that I've got my eyes on very closely. Nick Nanos says that the Conservatives are still competitive in Ontario and still leading in Ontario, but there's a lot of other polling that shows more recently that the Liberals are making big gains there. So interested to see what their messaging is. Particularly right now, we're hearing a lot about tax cuts from both parties and how they distinguish their messaging from each other in those key areas.
Yeah, and Scott, this is a pretty unique federal election that we're heading into. Yesterday, Carney called the snap election. What stood out to you in his speech yesterday?
Okay, we don't appear to have Scott's mic. Scott, hang tight for a second there, Scott, because we can't quite hear you. So let's go back to Vassy at this point. Of course, Scott, I really do want to get into Scott's experience in the PMO's office when he worked with Paul Martin as well, because these are really interesting times. But Vassy, you talk about battleground GTA and Ontario. I think we can hear Scott again. But Vassy, I'll just pick up on that, because this is really Ontario. The winning party needs to win Ontario, don't they, in order to form the next government, most likely?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's very few paths that go to the Prime Minister's office that don't somewhat go through Ontario. I mean, there are ways with, if you can sweep everywhere else type of thing, but current public opinion polling shows that that won't be the case. And in particular, when you look at provincial elections and past federal elections, that greater Toronto area, so not necessarily Toronto proper, which is considered pretty safe most of the time, except for a few by-elections for Liberals and NDPers in particular, but the suburbs, right? Brampton, where we know that Pierre Poilievre will be today, all of the surrounding area of Toronto remains quite competitive, and Conservatives usually have the ability to be competitive there. So for the Conservatives in particular, because Quebec is looking like a little bit of a lost cause at this point, that area will be key if they want to remain competitive or if they are going to be successful in the election. Liberals also hope to make gains there, and they'll be spending some time in and around that area. But in particular, I've got my eye on that area for the Conservatives.
Yeah, and Scott, let's turn back to you now. I was asking you about what you made of Carney's speech yesterday when he called the snap election. But in terms of strategy right now, we heard him talking about spending time with the Edmonton Oilers on the ice, his childhood experiences. What did you make of how he kind of made a comment about not focusing on negativity? Do you think that was kind of setting up a trap for the Conservatives, because they are kind of neck and neck in the polls right now?
To a degree. Look, I thought what really jumped out yesterday was the startling contrast in both style and strategy coming from the two principal leaders of Carney and Poilievre. So to your point, Carney presenting himself very matter-of-fact, very focused, very mission-built prime minister. I'm here to deal with the economy, and I want a mandate to take on Trump and secure our economic well-being. Whereas Poilievre was much more of a traditional political speech, much more of a partisan speech, and much more focused on the broad, sort of typical question of, it's time for a change. So a lot of it spent time going through all the sins of the Liberals in the past, talking about how the Liberals want a fourth term. And it was less focused inherently on this critical question of dealing with Trump. Trump appeared in a speech, but the style of the two men could not be more different. Poilievre, polished politician, not afraid to take the gloves off and go partisan. Carney sounds like what he is, a central banker, a guy who's here just to try to fix things, not necessarily a lifelong politician, maybe not even necessarily a good politician, but perhaps the prime minister that people might be looking for. And so whether it's the focus on Trump or whether it's the manner in which they deliver their messages, we're going to be treated to 37 days of two very different choices. And I think that's going to be very interesting to watch.
Yeah. And Scott, let's pick up on the 37 days. I mean, I know you worked so closely with Paul Martin in your time and working with an elected official there. What's the early days of the campaign like? You're in for this 5-week sprint/marathon. I don't know how you want to describe it. What's it like in the early days here as you're just getting your feet underneath you as the campaign rolls out?
Well, it's really important because you know that this is a period when people are paying close attention. There are lulls during your campaign, even a shorter one. You know that there are lulls where people check out and they are interested in other things. So you want to make a big, strong impression. The other thing you want to do is you want to sink every possible resource into defining the ballot question for voters. What I mean by that's wanker political speak for what will be on people's minds when they cast a ballot on April 28th. And again, you could see it. For Carney, it was, give me a mandate to deal with Trump. And by the way, I've got the calm, collected experience to deal with it. For Poilievre, it was the opposite. They were using every resource, every tool, every one of his political skills to say, this is time for a change. If you want real change, if you want to deal with Trump, the only way to deal with that is change, and I am change. So that's what you try to get going in the first couple of days. Grab people's attention and drive that final ballot question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Vassy, we're certainly in a very unique situation in this federal election. So many factors coming into play, including Trump. But what do you think are going to be the key issues that Canadians will be focused on?
Well, I think it's hard to get away from our focus and our collective anxiety around Donald Trump, right? And the degree to which he is taking aim at not just our economy, but our sovereignty. It remains, I think, the massive X factor through this all, and one that you could see, to Scott's point, in both of the launches yesterday was impossible to ignore, even if substantively the opening speeches or opening remarks weren't, dominated by Trump. All of the questions pretty much were. So I think that will remain, pardon me, at the forefront of what Canadians are anxious about and what informs ultimately their vote or how they decide who to vote for. But I do think that there are other things that we also care about. And affordable housing, even access to housing, period, the cost of groceries, all of those things that were driving public sentiment 6 months ago, 4 months ago, remain an anxiety for Canadians. The issue is if we don't have a country to worry about those things, it sort of, right, it almost changes the calculation. So I'm very curious to watch to see the degree to which Trump stays at the forefront of everything we are kind of anxious about. And a lot of that will be informed by what he says and does. But we already know there's more tariffs supposedly on the way just about a week and a half from now or a week from now. So I don't see how he ends up receding really from public dialogue.
We'll be hearing a lot of Trump, that's for sure. Okay, Vassy Kapelos, hopefully you can join us throughout the campaign. Nice to talk to you this morning, our CTV's chief political correspondent. Scott Reid will be joining us every morning here on Breakfast. Good to talk to you as we kick things off. Let's see where this goes. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you both.
Thanks, guys.